Oh, Jordan, on the screen I look tall and skinny. That's like my dream come true.
Oh, no, let me fix that. Oh, that's better.
Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It's the short and little chubby Chris Nichols here. We've got an interesting video for you today. We're going to compare the Sony a7 III against the Sony a7 IV in 5 categories. And this is going to be great for you, the viewer, to decide if you already have an a7 III, is it worth the upgrade to an a7 IV? Or if you're shopping for one for the first time, which way to go? We're going to answer that question for you. Now, before we get into our 5 categories, I just want to say that this video is really not about, which camera's better, the a7 III or the a7 IV. The fact is, the a7 IV is better in pretty much every way, shape, and form, except battery life. Really what we're trying to achieve is this a worthwhile upgrade for you? What is right for your needs? And so I'm going to keep it nice and simple and fun. We're going to give you basically 3 possible rankings. In our categories, the upgrade's either going to be not really worthwhile or definitely a worthwhile upgrade, or just do it, break your piggy bank, steal your kids' money, and go buy a Sony a7 IV right now because of this amazing feature that you've been waiting for your entire life. I'll probably shorten that. All right, first category, let's talk about handling. And I first want to say, although the a7 III was sort of, an enthusiast entry point for their cameras, it was by no means an entry-level camera. I mean, it's a well-designed, solidly built camera. I like the autofocusing joystick on the back. It's got a decent grip to it. But there are some design features that improve quite dramatically from the a7 III to the a7 IV. I do like that this autofocusing joystick is much easier to use and more tactile. We get a better grip on the a7 IV, more control dials. I like that this is customizable and lockable on the back here. I like the fully articulating screen. And then when you get into the actual camera itself, the new menu system is, a big improvement. The touchscreen interface is also really nice. So I don't know if I'd call this, the greatest upgrade ever, but this is definitely a worthwhile upgrade. Okay, so the next category we're going to talk about is our displays here on these cameras. Very important because this is how you compose your images. Now the a7 III, the back panel here is just a vertically articulating back panel for waist level shooting or above a crowd, for example. It's under 1 million dots. Not really great. The a7 IV's back panel, though, is just over 1 million dots. They're basically both fairly low resolution panels. This does fully articulate. I do like that, but I still find if I really want to check sharpness on my photos, I'm going to the EVF. Now, the a7 III has a 2.36 million dot EVF, very typical at the time. Now on the a7 IV, we go to 3.69 million dots. This is absolutely an advantage, especially when you are looking at your photos in playback and trying to, check critical sharpness. But the actual shooting experience, if you're shooting 120 frames per second on this camera or autofocusing, your resolution drops. And so in the end, from an actual shooting standpoint, it's kind of a wash. So for displays category, I'm going to say not really a worthwhile upgrade. Hey, so I thought I'd just give you guys a little bit of Canadiana here. So you can see those ducks there in open water, eh? It's only mid-November, but we got ice forming right next to it. And you might think, well, it can't possibly be frozen. But then just over here, you got pond hockey. You might think, oh, that's really dangerous so close to open water. But we got 1.5 inches of ice here. That's like Tim Hortons donut thick. Totally safe. People are playing on it. And if anybody knows pond hockey, it's Canadians. Or maybe Scandinavians. I mean, those guys will give her boy it.
No,
oh, all right then. Image quality, eh? Let's do it. Okay, so for our next category, let's take a look at image quality. So the first thing we did is we shot an uncompressed RAW file on both cameras, massively underexposed, and we pushed them up 5 stops to get an idea of the general exposure latitude of the cameras. And honestly, the Sony a7 IV doesn't really have an advantage here. They really push pretty much the same. But what about low light performance? When you look at both files at 12,800 ISO at the same viewing distance here in this example, here you can see the Sony a7 IV has definitely less noise than the a7 III. I mean, it's a nice improvement. Now, let's talk about those megapixels. 33 megapixels over 24 is a substantial increase. It doesn't mean it's going to make a big difference for your work. That all depends on how you like to display your files, how much you want to crop, how big you want to print. But in the grand scheme of things, it is nice that we're getting quite a few more megapixels on the Sony a7 IV. Last thing I'll say here is rolling shutter and silent shutter use. Both cameras have fairly slow reading sensors, so if you're using electronic shutter, you're going to get funky rolling shutter and weird diagonals where they should be vertical lines, and that's unfortunately on both cameras, so I wouldn't say anything of benefit one way or the other there. But overall, the Sony a7 IV has substantially better image quality. I would say that this is a worthwhile thing to look at for upgrading. All right, let's talk about autofocus next. Now, the Sony a7 III, always a decent autofocusing camera. I especially like the eye detect. It's great if I was shooting portraits or if you do weddings or something like that, where you could dynamically move closer or further away from a person, and as long as they're looking at the camera, it would lock on that eye and do a really nice job. And then it got firmware updates to actually make that interface much nicer. You didn't have to use a separate button for eye autofocus, even added animal eye detect as well. These are all nice upgrades. The main weakness I still find with the a7 III, the tracking is using the older lock-on tracking system. It's not as high a hit rate, kind of fiddly, not as effective, and so that's where we then go to the Sony a7 IV. I mean, this camera, its eye detect is fantastic, its animal eye detect is fantastic, but more importantly, you get real-time tracking. I mean, this uses machine learning techniques. It's very accurate, very easy to engage, and if I can use one autofocusing mode that pretty much takes care of any situation, is intelligent enough to automatically switch between tracking a subject and going to their eye. I mean, it's a really pleasurable experience, and overall, I think that is a big benefit. Okay, now what about the buffer on these cameras and sustained shooting? Well, first off, both cameras can shoot 10 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, which is great. But what about buffer speed? Okay, so our test, we're shooting raw. We want to shoot lossy compressed, just try to give the camera the easiest time possible. The a7 III was able to basically shoot on SD cards, but 82 shots in a row before it slowed down the buffer. Now, when I went over to the a7 IV, again, 10 frames per second, mechanical shutter mode, lossy compressed, but now I can shoot onto the CF Express Type A card, which is a little bit faster transfer rate, and of course higher megapixels as well, and I was getting 110 images before slowing down. So again, it's another win for the Sony a7 IV. I really think, again, if you want to shoot fast action in sports, the a7 IV is absolutely worthwhile. In fact, I'd even say just do it.
Jordan here to talk about video, and the Sony a7 III was a very popular mirrorless camera for video, especially when it first came out, because it had very sharp 4K video. It had actually fairly good autofocus if you could actually understand the interface enough to get that to work, but it had a lot of Sony's early real drawbacks. It was 8-bit video only, no high-resolution slow motion recording, and Sony has addressed all of that with the a7 IV. So the Sony a7 III did give us oversampled video when you were shooting 4K, but only at 24 frames per second. There was actually a crop and quality loss if you went to 30 frames per second. Now we get full sensor readout at 24 and 30 frames per second. We also get now a 4K 60 frame per second mode, which was not available on the a7 III. Yes, there is a crop factor when you use that on the a7 IV, but it's really great that we've got that option. As far as color profiles, the a7 III did have S-Log2, S-Log3, HLG, but really S-Log3 and HLG are designed for 10-bit color space. So if you use those modes, you could find you could get banding, or you'd have really awful color transitions, where those are much more usable now with the a7 IV, as you can see right here. The a7 IV also gets Sony's real-time autofocus tracking in video mode. So just tap on the touchscreen the object you want the camera to follow, it'll show you what it's following, and it is very persistent, very sticky. It's a very reliable autofocus system. Now, if you switch over to manual focus, you also get access to the focus map tool. This mode will indicate whether you're focused in front or behind your subject, and then show them in natural color if you're perfectly focused. It's quite intuitive. We also have breathing correction, and I went into some detail in our a7 IV review. You should definitely check it out, but it is very useful. I mean, all of these different video tools and features all come together to just make this a much better video package than the a7 III. So if you're really into video, I'd say just do it. Get an a7 IV.
So the Sony a7 cameras have really been about versatility, being able to handle many different kinds of photography and situations, but still being fairly affordable, a jack of all trades, so to speak. And they do a great job at that. But the a7 IV is more capable than the a7 III in pretty much every way, shape, and form. So let's talk about a couple scenarios, figure out which one would be best for you. So first off, let's say that this is your first foray into a Sony a7 body. You're looking at the a7 III or the a7 IV, which way to go? I think the a7 IV, although it's more expensive, is worth it. You just get a lot more capabilities and modernization. I would go the a7 IV if this is my first foray. However, what if you already have an a7 III and you're trying to figure out, is it worth upgrading to an a7 IV? And that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. I mean, first off, if you're doing some landscapes, casual portraits, maybe some wedding work or something, but nothing major, that's a real gray area. The a7 IV would do a better job, but is it worth the extra cost? If I really wanted up my video game, then I think I would go the A7 IV. That could be worthwhile. If I really wanted to get into some more advanced journalism, wildlife, sports, then that might be another situation where the better autofocusing capability, the higher buffer rate, and just be able to wring out that little extra performance might actually be worthwhile. If I wanted more megapixels, I might look at the A7R platforms instead to really get that benefit, unless, again, I wanted a very versatile camera that could also do great video and then just have that megapixel bump. Well, maybe the A7 IV would make sense there. In the end, I really hope this video helps clarify what the best option is for you. If you get a chance, do check out our A7 III review. It's on there, and it's in the link in the description below, or the A7 IV reviews as well, just to get more information, help you guys make the right decision. Otherwise, please like and subscribe to the channel. We'd appreciate that. We'll see you guys all soon with another episode of DPReview TV.